The storm on Uranine was the worst anyone had seen in years. The wind screamed like a living thing, pushing walls of white snow across the empty frozen plains. Most people stayed inside the colony shelters, but Mark Hale, a human veteran and now a simple supply driver, was still out in the storm. He had delivered medicine to an outpost and was trying to return before the weather became even more dangerous. His rover shook under the force of the blizzard. Snow hit the windows so hard that it sounded like stones. Even with strong lights, Mark could barely see anything beyond a few meters. He kept both hands tight on the controls, fighting the storm with calm skill. He had survived worse things in the war, and he believed he could survive this too. But then something strange happened. Through the white blur, he noticed a small shape on the frozen road. At first, he thought it was only a piece of broken equipment. But as he slowed down, the shape moved. Mark frowned. He leaned forward, wiping the inside of the glass with his glove. Another shape appeared beside the first one. And another. And something like a shaking hand lifted weakly toward the lights. Mark's heart dropped. "These are not supplies," he whispered to himself. "These are people." Without thinking further, he brought the rover to a stop and opened the door. The wind almost tore it from his hands. The cold bit into his skin instantly. He stepped out, pushing through snow up to his knees, heading toward the figures in the storm. As he got closer, he saw them clearly, a woman with dark blue alien skin, holding two small children close to her chest. Their thin coats were covered in ice. Their faces were pale and shaking. The woman looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. She was an alien widow, one of the refugees who had lost everything during the old war. Many refugees lived in poor shelters outside the colony walls. Most humans ignored them. Some even hated them. And now this widow and her children were lost in the middle of a deadly blizzard, far from safety. Mark felt his chest tighten. No one could survive out here for long. He spoke loudly so she could hear over the wind. "Ma'am, you need to come with me. It's not safe here." The woman shook her head. She held the children even tighter. Her voice broke as she replied, "No, please leave us. Humans do not help us." Mark's heart hurt at those words. He understood her fear. He understood her pain. But this was not the time for old wounds. This was life or death. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even though the storm made it hard to speak. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just wanted to help your children. They're freezing." One of the kids collapsed forward, almost falling from her arms. Mark immediately knelt down, reaching to check the child's breathing. It was weak. Too weak. A deep, thunder-like cracking noise split the air. Mark looked down. The ice beneath them was fracturing. A thin, dark line ran across the ground, spreading fast like a snake under the snow. The frozen field was breaking apart under the weight of the storm. If it collapsed, they would all fall into the freezing lake below. The widow gasped in fear. The children started to cry. The wind grew stronger, whipping snow around them like knives. Mark stood up quickly, his soldier instincts kicking in. "We have seconds, listen to me." The widow stared at him, terrified and unsure. Mark held out his hand to her, strong, warm, steady, while the ice crack widened at their feet. "Come with me," he said, voice firm and urgent. "If you want your kids to live." The wind roared louder. Another loud crack shook the ground. Snow shifted beneath them. The widow looked from the breaking ice to her children, then to Mark's open hand. Her chest rose and fell with fear. The ice gave another sharp snap. The storm howled. The children whimpered. Mark waited, hands still held out, not moving even an inch. This was her one chance. Their only chance. The part ends on her trembling hand, slowly lifting. As the ice beneath them begins to collapse, the widow's hand finally touched Mark's glove just as the ice cracked loudly beneath them. Mark did not waste a single second. He grabbed her wrist firmly, pulled her closer, and lifted the smaller of the two children into his arms. The wind felt sharper now, like it wanted to cut through them. Snow swirled around their faces, making it hard to breathe. "Stay close," Mark shouted. He turned toward the rover, but the storm had already buried half of its wheels under fresh snow. The widow struggled to walk, her legs weak from cold and hunger. The older child stumbled every few steps. Mark kept looking back, making sure they did not fall behind. Another crack ripped across the ice field. The ground dipped slightly. The widow screamed as she almost slipped. Mark tightened his grip on her and moved faster. The child in his arms was freezing. The little girl's eyes were half closed, her breathing slow and shallow. Mark could feel her trembling even through his thick suit. He pulled her closer to his chest to give her what little warmth he could. "You're okay, kid," he whispered. "Just hold on." When they reached the rover, the wind slammed the side door open for them, almost tearing it from its hinges. Mark helped the widow and the older child inside first, then pushed the younger one into her arms. He climbed in last and forced the door shut with all his strength. Inside the rover, the air felt warmer but still cold. The lights flickered as the storm shook the vehicle. Mark dropped into the driver's seat and hit the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then finally roared to life. The widow looked terrified as the rover shook. Snow hit the windows like thousands of tiny fists. "Are we safe?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Not yet," Mark answered honestly, "but safer than out there." He pushed the rover forward. The wheels spun for a second, then gained traction. They moved slowly across the icy plain, but every few meters the wind pushed them sideways. Mark gripped the controls hard, using all his training to keep the rover steady. The older child stared at Mark with wide eyes. "Sir, will we die?" he asked softly. Mark did not look back, but his voice was calm and firm. "No, not today. Not while I'm here." The widow held her children close, watching Mark with a mix of fear and confusion. No human had ever spoken to her with such certainty before. The storm grew even worse. The lights on the rover reached only a short distance before snow swallowed the beams. Everything outside looked like a white wall. The engine warning light began blinking red. "Come on." "Not now," Mark muttered. The rover suddenly jolted. A loud metallic sound echoed from the back. "What was that?" the widow cried. Mark checked the sensors. Something hit the rover. Something big. A deep howl came through the storm. It was not wind. The widow covered the children's ears, eyes wide with terror. "That is not human. What is it?" Mark knew the sound too well. He felt a cold shiver go down his spine. "A frost ripper," he said quietly. "A predator that hunts during whiteouts." The rover shook again, harder this time. The creature rammed the back of the vehicle. The younger child cried loudly. The older one grabbed his sister's hand, trying to be brave. Mark accelerated, but the storm made the rover slow and heavy. The ripper howled again, closer this time. The widow's voice cracked. "It is following us." Mark gave a sharp nod. "Yes, and it won't stop." Another strike hit the side of the rover, causing it to slide sideways across the ice. The vehicle almost tipped over, but Mark fought the controls and brought it back. The engine warning turned solid red. The coil. Temperature dropped. The power output dipped. The rover was dying. "We can't reach the city like this," Mark whispered to himself. The widow heard him. She was shaking now, hugging her children tightly. "What will we do?" she asked. Mark stared into the blizzard. Ahead, he knew there was only one choice. "We find shelter," he said. "Something close, something strong." He scanned his memory. Yes, there was one place nearby. An old military bunker from the war. He turned the rover north. The widow looked at him, unsure. "Where are you taking us?" Mark met her eyes in. The mirror, voice steady. To the only place that can save us before the storm and the creature kill us first. The rover pushed forward, the howling beast still following, and the storm growing darker by the minute. The rover pushed through the storm, but every minute the engine grew weaker. The warning lights flashed brighter, and a low beeping filled the cabin. The widow held her children close, whispering soft words to calm them. But Mark could see the fear in her eyes. She did not hide it well. Outside, the frost ripper's howl cut through the storm again. The sound was sharp, deep, and full of hunger. Even with thick metal walls between them, the children flinched each time they heard it. Mark knew this creature. He had seen one once during the war. They were fast, smart, and deadly hunters. Most people never survived meeting one. The widow tightened her arms around her children. "Why is it following us?" she asked, voice shaking. Mark kept his eyes forward. "Because we're warm. And because the storm is making hunting easy for it." Suddenly, the rover shook as something slammed into the roof. Snow fell from the ceiling panels. The younger child screamed. The older child covered her ears as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Hold on!" Mark shouted. He swerved left, trying to shake the creature off. The rover slid across the ice, but the frost ripper clung to the metal shell, claws scraping loudly. The noise felt like knives dragging across steel. The widow gasped. "It is on top of us." Mark forced the rover forward, pushing the engine harder than it could handle. Another warning light blinked. "Coil freezing," he muttered under his breath. Of course, why wouldn't everything break today? A heavy thud sounded on the roof, followed by a long scraping growl. Then silence. Mark froze. The widow looked. "Up. Is it gone?" "No," Mark said quietly. "It's waiting." The storm suddenly shifted. The snow became lighter for a moment, and through the blur Mark spotted the faint shape of the old military bunker in the distance. A dark silhouette against the endless white. "There," he said. "Almost there." But the creature was not. Planning to let them reach it, another strike hit the right side. The rover spun halfway before Mark regained control. The children cried again, their small hands gripping their mother tightly. "I can fix this," Mark said, trying to sound calm. "We just have to reach the bunker." The widow looked worried. "But the engine." "I know," he replied. "It's already freezing. I need to stop and repair the coils, or the rover will die before we reach shelter." The widow stared at him with disbelief. "In this storm? Outside? With that monster?" Mark nodded once. "There is no choice." He brought the rover to a slow stop behind a cluster of snow-covered rocks. They gave a little protection from the wind, but not much. The frost ripper circled somewhere in the storm. They could not see it, but they could feel it. Before stepping out, Mark looked at the widow and her children. "Lock the doors behind me. Do not open them unless I knock 3 times slowly." The widow reached out, grabbing his sleeve. "You will die if you go out there." Mark gave a small smile, tired, sad, but steady. "I've been close to death before. I always come back." With that, he stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall. His breath froze on his visor. Snow whipped against his suit as he moved to the back of the rover. He opened the engine panel, fingers shaking from the cold, but working fast. The coils were covered in ice. He grabbed a small heater tool and began clearing them. Inside the rover, the widow tried to calm the children, but every sound outside made her jump. She looked through the window but could only see white. Outside, Mark worked faster. His skin burned from the cold, even inside the suit. He heard something crunch in the snow behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing. He continued working. Then he heard the growl. Low, close. The frost ripper surged out of the storm, a huge shadow with glowing blue eyes. Its claws dug into the ice as it charged toward him. Mark grabbed the first thing he could, a flare stick from his belt. He activated it, and a bright red flame burst to life. He held it out as the creature leaped. The flare's sudden light blinded the Ripper for a moment. It screeched in pain and stumbled back, giving Mark a few precious seconds. He finished heating the coils and slammed the engine panel shut. The creature recovered. It crouched, ready to pounce. Mark ran. He sprinted through the snow, the creature right behind him. He jumped onto the side of the rover, hit the door with his fist. 3 slow knocks. The door opened instantly. The widow pulled him inside, slamming. It shut as the claws scraped across the metal. Mark collapsed into the seat, breathing hard. The engine will work now, he said. The widow looked at him, tears in her eyes. You saved us again. But the danger was not over. The Frost Ripper roared and attacked the rover once more, and the bunker was still far away. Deeper in the storm. The rover pushed forward again, its engine fighting hard against the freezing wind. The Frost Ripper was still behind them, but now its howl sounded farther away. It could not keep up with the rover's speed, at least not on the open ice. Even so, every shadow in the storm made the children jump. The widow kept whispering calming words, though her own hands trembled. Mark focused on getting them to the bunker. The memory of that place was old and heavy, buried deep in his past. He had used it during the war, long before peace was signed. Part of him hoped it was still standing. Part of him feared what Hale would find there. After several long minutes, the dark shape of the bunker finally came into view, half buried under snow, but still strong. Thick metal walls rose from the ice. No light came from inside, but the structure looked intact. We made it, Mark said softly. The widow looked unsure. What is this place? Shelter, Mark answered. A safe one. But as they got closer, she noticed the faded symbol painted across the bunker's entrance. Sharp, angular mark with a human eagle beside it. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. That symbol, she whispered. It belonged to the human war units. Mark's shoulders tightened. He did not respond immediately. He drove to the entrance, stopped the rover, and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt strange after the roaring storm. The widow's voice shook. Why bring us here? Because it's safe, Mark replied. And because we don't have another choice. The children huddled close to their mother. They stared at the old war symbol like it might come alive and hurt them. Mark slowly removed his gloves and opened the rover door. Stay close, he said, and watch your step. They stepped out into the storm. Snow hit their faces, but the wind felt slightly weaker behind the bunker's large metal frame. Mark led them to the heavy door and used his emergency override tool. After a few tense seconds, the lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, the bunker was cold, dark, and silent. Mark used a small lantern to light the space. Old metal crates lined the walls. Dust covered everything. The air smelled like rust and memories. The widow stopped at the doorway, frozen in place. Her voice was barely a whisper. My husband died. Because of this unit. Because of humans who wore that symbol. Mark halted. Slowly, he turned to face her. His expression softened. I know. Her eyes widened with anger and fear. Then why bring us here? Why force us into a place full of pain for my people? I'm not forcing you, Mark said calmly. You can stay outside if you want. But the storm will kill you. And the creature is still hunting. Silence filled the space. Snow blew into the entrance. The widow hugged her children tighter. Mark stepped back inside and turned on a few old heating units. The machines hummed weakly but began to warm the air. I'll keep my distance, he said. You don't have to sit near me. This is just a place to survive. The widow hesitated. She looked at her children, their blue skin pale from cold. She took a shaky breath and stepped inside, but she kept several meters between her. Family and Mark. He understood. Mark found blankets in an old storage crate and laid them near the heating units. The children immediately reached for the warmth. The widow wrapped them carefully, watching Mark from the corner of her eye. "How do you know this place?" she finally asked, voice cautious. Mark sat on a metal crate far from them. "I used it during the war." The widow flinched. Mark continued, his tone soft. "This bunker is where my squad stayed during missions. It is also the place where I lost almost all of them." The widow's expression changed. Shock, confusion, a little sadness. Mark stared at the floor. "I saved one alien family during that time, but I failed to save my own people. I carried that guilt for years." The widow looked at him more carefully now, her anger mixed with curiosity. Mark raised his eyes, meeting hers. "I don't want to fail again. Not today. Not with you and your children." The child beside her whispered, "Mama, he helped us. Twice." The widow sighed. Her shoulders softened just a little, but fear still lived in her eyes. The heater lights flickered. The bunker walls groaned. Under the weight of the storm. Suddenly, a loud metallic bang echoed outside. The widow grabbed her children. "Is it the creature again?" Mark listened carefully. "No," he said. "That was a vehicle." The widow's face turned pale. "A rescue?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Not rescue, someone else." Another bang. Another engine. Multiple engines. Mark's heart tightened. "Stay behind me," he said. Outside, through the storm, the dark shapes of 3 armored vehicles appeared, ones he recognized. Ones she feared. "They're not here to help," Mark whispered. And for the first time, the widow understood that the storm was not their only danger. The ground near the bunker shook as the 3 armored vehicles stopped outside. Their engines growled loudly, drowning out even the sound of the blizzard. Snow blew around them, but their black metal bodies still looked sharp and threatening. In the dim light, Mark watched through the narrow bunker window. His jaw tightened. He recognized the designed military-grade security transports used by the colony's enforcement unit. Not rescuers. Not helpers. These were the very people who forced refugees out of safe zones and sent them back into the wild. The widow saw the same symbols painted on the vehicles and froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her arms wrapped tightly around her children. "No. No, they came for us," she whispered. Mark stepped between her and the door. "They don't know you're here yet. Stay silent." But it was already too late. A loud knock slammed into the bunker door. Then a rough voice shouted over the storm, "Open the door." "Colony security." The children jumped. The widow trembled so hard that Mark thought she might collapse. Another bang, another yell. More aggressive this time. "We know you're inside." Mark held up a hand. "Stay back, all of you." The widow whispered, "If they take us, we will never see each other again." They split families. Mark turned his head just enough so she could see his eyes. His voice was low but strong. "I'm not letting anyone take you." Her eyes widened, shocked by the certainty in his tone. The door shook under another powerful hit. Snow fell from the ceiling as the metal bent slightly. The colony security force clearly didn't care about harming whoever was inside. Mark grabbed an old service rifle from a crate, checked the chamber, then lowered it. The rifle had no power cells, useless. He placed it aside and looked around. The bunker. He found a wrench. Heavy, solid. It would have to do. The widow stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mark, you can't fight them. They have armor, weapons. Everything." Mark gave a faint smile. "Good thing I'm not planning to fight fair." The door suddenly stopped shaking. A voice spoke again, but this time calmer, more controlled. "Mark." "Hale," the commander called. "We know you're in there. Open the door. Hand over the aliens. This is your final warning." The widow gasped. "They know your name?" Mark exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I used to serve with them." The widow stepped back, fear washing over her face again. Then, you're one of them? Mark shook his head firmly. No, not anymore. The commander's voice grew colder. Mark, you're sheltering illegal refugees. This is a direct violation of colony law. Open this door, or we enter by force. Mark did not move. The widow whispered, they will kill us. Mark looked at her children. Both stared at him with wide, scared eyes. Something old and heavy inside him rose again, the same feeling he had felt during the war when innocent lives depended on him. He gripped the wrench. Get into the back room. Stay quiet. The widow hesitated, then nodded. She ushered the children into a small storage area behind some crates. Just as she closed the door, the bunker entrance exploded inward. Metal ripped apart. Snow rushed in. Dust filled the air. 4 armored soldiers stepped inside with rifles raised. Their helmets glowed with scanning lights. Mark Hale, the commander said as he entered, tall and cold-eyed. Step aside. Mark stood in the middle of the room, wrench at his side, calm but unyielding. They're just a mother and 2 kids. Leave them alone. The commander laughed. You've grown soft. Mark didn't blink. Maybe, but I'm not letting you take kids into a storm to die. The commander stepped closer. You have no weapons. You can't win. Mark looked at him steadily. I don't need to win. I just need to delay you. Before the commander could respond, Mark swung the wrench at the nearest soldier. The hit knocked the soldier's rifle away. A second soldier grabbed Mark from behind, but he twisted free, slamming his elbow into the soldier's chest plate. Chaos exploded inside the bunker. The widow and her children heard everything, metal crashing, men shouting, Mark grunting with effort. The older child whispered through tears, Mama, Mark is fighting for us. The widow's heart tightened painfully. Back in the main room, the commander pointed a weapon at Mark. Stand down, Hale. Mark wiped blood from his lip but didn't. Step back. Not happening. The commander fired. The blast hit the heater unit behind Mark, sending sparks flying and igniting a small fire. Flames spread fast across the old wires. Mark realized the truth. Instantly, the bunker was going to explode. He looked at the soldiers, then at the back room where the widow waited, terrified. He had only one choice. He sprinted toward the back door and yelled, We have to leave now. The widow grabbed her children's hands. The bunker filled with smoke, and outside, the storm raged. Waiting for them, the flames spread faster than anyone expected. Old wires, dry insulation, and long-forgotten fuel lines all caught fire at once. A thick black smoke filled the bunker, making it hard to see and even harder to breathe. The children coughed. The widow covered their faces with her arms, trying to shield them from the burning air. Mark grabbed her wrist gently but urgently. We move now. Stay close to me. The widow nodded, fear shining in her eyes. She clutched both children as tightly as she could. Smoke poured from the ceiling, and sparks dropped like burning snow. Behind them, the commander shouted orders. Block the exits. Do not let them escape. But Mark knew this bunker better than any of the soldiers. He had lived here once, fought from here, cried here. He knew every hallway, every tunnel, every hidden door. He pulled the widow and the children behind a tall storage crate and pushed open a small metal hatch concealed behind it. A ladder led down into darkness. This way, he whispered. The widow hesitated. Where does it go? Out, Mark said simply. Before this place explodes. The children didn't question him. They trusted him more than they trusted the world. The older child went down first, then the widow helped the younger one, and finally she followed after them. Mark climbed down last and shut the hatch above them, just as a small explosion boomed in the main room. The tunnel below was narrow, cold, and filled with dust, but it was safe from the fire. Mark used a small light on his wrist pad to guide them. The widow whispered, Why are they hunting us? Why are they risking their lives to catch a mother and 2 children? Mark sighed. Because the colony sees you as a problem. Refugees don't get protection. And some people in power want to control who gets help. The widow looked down at her children, her heart breaking. But we did nothing wrong. I know, Mark said quietly. That's why I'm here. Suddenly, loud metal bangs echoed above them. The soldiers had found the hatch. They're coming. The older child cried. Mark placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Don't worry. They won't reach us in time. He hurried the group through the tunnel until they reached a lift door, a small emergency escape platform. Mark pressed the activation button. The machine groaned, then slowly started to rise. Above them, footsteps approached the hatch. Soldiers shouted, coughing from the smoke. The widow held her breath. What if they shoot us when we reach the top? Mark shook his head. They won't see us. This lift opens outside the cliff behind the bunker. It's hidden. The platform stopped. The top door slid open, blasting them with freezing wind. Snow rushed inside, but the fresh air felt good after the smoke-filled bunker. Mark climbed out first, checked the surroundings, then helped the widow and children out. The Frost Ripper's trail was visible in the snow, but the creature itself was gone for now. The widow wrapped the children in the blankets Mark had brought earlier. Their small bodies shivered, but they were alive. Then Mark turned to them and spoke softly, with a seriousness that made the widow's heart tremble. Listen to me. From this point on, I am with you until the end. No one touches you. No one takes your children. Not while I breathe. The widow stared at him, stunned. Why do you care so much? You don't even know us. Mark took a deep breath. The wind blew snow across his face, making him look older, worn, but strong. Because I failed before, he said. I failed my squad. I failed people who trusted me. I will not fail again. The widow felt her eyes sting with emotion. Her voice came out small. You didn't fail us. But the moment was cut short. Behind them, the bunker shook violently. Flames shot through cracks in the metal. A deep rumble followed. Run! Mark yelled. He grabbed the widow's hand and pulled her away from the cliff, just as the bunker exploded. A giant fireball lit the sky. The shockwave knocked them into the snow. Pieces of metal flew like burning birds across the storm. The widow covered the children with her body. Mark shielded all three of them with his arms. The explosion faded, leaving behind a huge column of black smoke rising into the freezing air. Mark stood slowly, helping the widow to her feet. We need to move. Those soldiers won't stop. They'll call for backup. The widow looked at him with fear. Where can we go? The rover is broken. The storm is worse. The creature might return. Mark pointed north. A soft, distant light blinked in the white fog. There, he said. An old Cums tower. If I can reach it, I can send a message that the colony cannot block. The widow held her children tightly. Will help come? Mark met her eyes. Yes. Because this time, I'm calling someone who listens. The storm howled around them. The soldiers were still searching, and the Frost Ripper's distant howl returned. But Mark kept walking, leading the family through the snow. The storm grew stronger as Mark led the widow and her children toward the Cums tower. The wind howled like a living beast, pushing against them with icy force. Snowflakes stung their faces and stole their breath. Each step felt heavier than the last dot, but Mark did not slow down. His back bent forward against the wind, his arms shielding the children whenever the gusts became too strong. The widow followed closely, clutching the little ones, trusting Mark more with every step. The blinking light of the Cums tower grew brighter still, far, but reachable. Just a little longer, Mark said softly, though his voice shook from the cold. The widow looked at him with tired eyes. How do you keep going? Mark gave a small, tired smile. Simple. I promised your kids they'd live. The children, though weak, looked up at him with hope. That hope pushed him forward more than any warmth ever could. But the danger wasn't gone. A long, deep howl echoed through the storm. The frost ripper had followed them again. The widow gasped. The children clung to her legs. Mark instantly positioned himself between them and the direction of the sound. "Stay behind me," he said. A dark shape moved in the snow, fast, low, coming closer. Mark pulled a small survival knife from his belt. Not enough to kill the beast, but enough to buy time. The widow whispered shakily, "Mark, you can't fight that thing alone." Mark didn't look back. "I'm not planning to win. I'm planning to give you time to run." Before she could answer, the creature lunged from the shadows. Its claws scraped the ice. Its glowing eyes locked onto the family. Mark shouted, "Go!" But the widow didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a handful of snow and threw it at the creature's face. The kids screamed, and the frost ripper hesitated for a second, confused by the sudden movement. Mark used that second to charge. He slammed into the creature with all his strength. The impact threw both of them into the snow. The widow cried out his name. The creature snapped its jaws, barely missing Mark's arm. Mark stabbed the knife upward, hitting its shoulder. It roared in pain. "Run to the tower," Mark yelled. Again. This time, the widow obeyed. She lifted the children and ran through the storm, tears freezing on her face. She looked back only once, just long enough to see Mark wrestling with the monster in the snow. The children sobbed. "Will Mark die?" The widow's voice cracked. "No, he promised he wouldn't." The Cum's tower was closer now. A metal door sat at its base. She reached it and started pounding on the frozen keypad. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Behind her, Mark's voice roared through the blizzard. "Rilani! Get them inside!" She slammed her fist against the keypad again and again, until suddenly the lock clicked. The door opened, and she rushed the children inside. Warm lights flickered on automatically. Old machines hummed weakly. The tower was still functional, but Mark wasn't inside. The widow ran back to the door and stared into the storm. She saw only white, and two shapes moving. The frost ripper had thrown Mark across the snow. He struggled to stand, breath steaming violently in the cold. The creature limped toward him, still dangerous, still hungry. Before it reached him, Mark grabbed a broken metal pipe sticking from the snow and swung it hard. The hit made the creature stumble. Mark used the moment to run toward the tower. "Open the door," he shouted. The widow did. He dove inside just as the creature lunged, smashing its claws against the metal door. The widow slammed it shut and locked it. The frost ripper scratched and growled, but the tower walls were too strong. The kids ran to Mark and hugged him tightly. "You came back," they cried. He smiled weakly and hugged them back. "Of course, I'm not leaving you." The widow wiped her tears. "You saved us again. I don't understand why." Mark sat down near the comms console, breathing heavily. "Because someone has to stand up for you. And I'm done letting people suffer because others look away." He began typing on the old control pad, entering an emergency override code. Only high-ranking veterans knew. The machine buzzed, then connected to a secure human space channel. A calm voice answered, "This is Earth Alliance Command. Identify yourself." Mark straightened his back. "Sergeant Mark Hale, retired. Emergency request. Colony forces are attacking refugees. Immediate aid required." A long pause, then the voice changed tone. "Sergeant Hale. Orders received. A rescue ship is already en route." The widow gasped. "They're coming for us," Mark nodded. "Yes, and this time, no one can stop it." Minutes later, a bright blue light broke through the storm. A large human rescue craft descended, wings cutting the snow-filled sky. When it landed, officers stepped out and saluted Mark. "Sergeant Hale, we heard everything. The family is under full protection now." The widow covered her mouth and cried. The children hugged Mark even tighter. One officer knelt beside them. "You're safe now. Your new home will be warm. You will not be separated. You have our word." The widow looked at Mark. "You gave us life again." Mark's voice was soft. "No, you kept fighting. I just helped you reach the end." As the rescue team guided them onto the ship, the widow held Mark's hand, her eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something like hope. The storm raged outside, but inside the rescue craft, warmth filled the air. A widow found safety. Her children found a protector. And a human veteran found peace. Finally,